Mr. Theodore Farley, a retired schoolteacher in his late 70s, had lived on Elmwood Lane for over 40 years. Known for his meticulous garden and fondness for old books, he lived alone after his wife passed a decade prior. His days had settled into a rhythm of quiet mornings with tea and crossword puzzles, afternoons tending to his roses, and evenings by the fire with a well-worn novel. That changed when Jake moved in next door. Jake was 7, all boundless energy and curiosity, with a mop of sandy hair that seemed perpetually mussed and an affinity for collecting rocks and bugs. His parents, new to the neighborhood and busy with demanding jobs, often let Jake roam the backyard unsupervised. Jake's world was small and wild, revolving around the patch of woods behind their homes, a rusty bike he'd named Thunder, and the small treasures he found in creeks and under logs. One day, Jake wandered too close to the hedge separating his yard from Mr. Farley's meticulously maintained garden. The boy, spotting a particularly vibrant red rose, darted through the gap in the hedge, startling Mr. Farley. "Young man, this isn't a playground," Mr. Farley said sharply, standing with his pruning shears in hand. Jake froze, his wide blue eyes locked on Mr. Farley. Then he did something unexpected. He grinned. "That's the biggest rose I've ever seen," he exclaimed. "Can I hold it, mister?" Farley blinked, momentarily disarmed by the boy's unabashed enthusiasm. "Roses are meant to be looked at, not plucked," he replied. "But you can see it up close." That small interaction led to more. Jake began visiting Mr. Farley's garden regularly, always eager to share his latest finds, a shiny beetle, a peculiar leaf, or a strangely shaped pebble. Over time, Mr. Farley found himself looking forward to the boy's visits. He began teaching Jake the names of flowers and how to spot different bird species. They'd sit on the garden bench together, Jake peppering Mr. Farley with questions while the old man patiently answered, his gruff demeanor softening. Jake's favorite spot was the old oak tree at the back of Mr. Farley's property. He'd climb it as far as Mr. Farley would allow, claiming it gave him the best view of the universe. Mr. Farley, ever cautious, had even rigged up a small rope ladder to make Jake's climb safer. One late autumn afternoon, Jake didn't show up. At first, Mr. Farley thought nothing of it. Maybe the boy had homework or his parents had taken him somewhere. But when dusk fell and the familiar knock on his garden gate never came, Mr. Farley felt uneasy. He walked over to Jake's house and rang the doorbell. Jake's mother answered, her face pale and her expression anxious. "Mr. Farley," she said, her voice trembling, "Jake didn't come home after school. We've called the police, but they haven't found him yet." Panic gripped Mr. Farley. "Do you know where he might have gone?" he asked. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He always plays in the woods, but they've already searched there." While the neighbors and police organized a search party, Mr. Farley retreated to his study. He sat in his armchair, tapping his fingers against the armrest. He thought about all the times Jake had described his adventures, the places he loved, the paths he favored. Jake had a knack for finding quiet spots, little nooks where he could daydream and explore. Then Mr. Farley remembered something. A few weeks ago, Jake had been particularly excited about a small cave he'd found near the creek at the edge of the woods. "It's like my secret hideout," Jake had declared. Heart pounding, Mr. Farley grabbed his coat and flashlight. He set off toward the woods, the chill of the evening air biting at his skin. He moved quickly but carefully, his flashlight beam sweeping the ground. He followed the narrow trail that Jake had often taken, noting the faint tracks of small sneakers in the dirt. When he reached the creek, he hesitated. The woods were eerily silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. Then, faintly, he heard it, a muffled sound, almost like a whimper. "Jake," he called out, his voice cracking. "Mr. Farley," came a small, shaky voice from the direction of the creek. Mr. Farley scrambled down the bank, slipping on wet leaves, until he spotted the cave. Jake was inside, huddled against the wall, his knees pulled to his chest. His face lit up when he saw Mr. Farley. "I got lost," Jake said, his voice quivering. "I thought I could find my way back, but it got dark, and I was scared." Mr. Farley knelt beside him, wrapping his coat around the boy's small shoulders. "You're safe now, Jake," he said softly. "Let's get you home." When they emerged from the woods, Jake's parents ran to meet them, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They hugged Jake tightly, thanking Mr. Farley over and over. That night, as Mr. Farley sat by his fire, he realized just how much the boy had changed his life. Jake had brought light and purpose back into his quiet days, and in turn, Mr. Farley had come to know the boy better than anyone else. It wasn't just a friendship, it was a bond that transcended generations, rooted in understanding and care. From that day on, Jake never ventured far without telling Mr. Farley first. And Mr. Farley, in his quiet way, made sure Jake always had a safe place to explore, and always knew he had someone looking out for him.